If you joined me several weeks ago when we discussed several dark goddesses and their role in shadow work, you know that we don't go into the shadows alone. We go in with magic, we go in with mystery, and we also go in with guides that have walked this path long before we have. So tonight we will be talking about four more dark goddesses who are perfect for the shadow work journey. These are goddesses of grief, of mystery, of death, and of power. And they're not here just to fix you, they're here to help you remember who you are. So if you are feeling stuck, if you are feeling kind of keyed up, if you are feeling ready to turn inward, then you are in the right place. So, Merry Meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and tonight we are here talking about more dark goddesses for shadow work. So, welcome to those who are joining us. Go ahead and say hi in the chat. Let us know that you are here. I see that Andrea is here and Kurt is here and Sonia's here. Merry meet, everybody. Hopefully the microphone is working okay. And we've got a lot to talk about, so we're going to dive in. But I definitely encourage you as we go. If these are goddesses that you have worked with before, we'd love to hear from you in the chat, whether you're live or you're watching back later. Leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the feed too, and that helps us get this out to more people. And of course, if you are, as always, if you are here live, we do have a Q&A at the end, so you can put your questions and your comments in the chat, and I will answer all of those at the end. So I'm saying hi to a few more joining us. Cindy's here, and Peggy, and Nancy. Merry meet, everybody. All right, so we are going to jump in. We are talking more about more dark goddesses. This episode was originally supposed to have 5 goddesses, but we're only going to be talking about 4 today. That allows us to go into deeper discussion of these, and then we will have a future episode where I will talk about some of the ones that we don't have time to talk about tonight. And saying hi to Lauren as well. Merry meet, everybody. Okay, so tonight the 4 goddesses we'll be discussing are Lilith, Nyx, Persephone, and the Morrigan. Now, Nephthys, who is an Egyptian deity of mourning and grief and death, she was supposed to be on our list, but I had to take a call with a student earlier who's in Italy, one of my educational therapy students, and the call went 3 hours instead of 2 hours, so ran out of time. So that just means that we'll have a new episode. It's in some future time, and we'll talk about Nephthys during that episode, as well as several other goddesses. So if you watch the previous episode, episode 138, Shadow Work and the Dark Goddesses, or episode 140, Shadow Work and the Dark Gods, we discussed different deities that are very good for the shadow work journey and different aspects of the journey that they can be good for. I found that my episodes on deities are very popular, and there are so many deities to discuss. So I wanted to go more in depth with some of these dark goddesses, and then we'll probably have a future episode on more dark gods as well. But you can definitely go back and check episodes 138 and 140 out. I'll link those below the video after the live as well. So why would we want to work with dark goddesses in our shadow work? So one thing is that myths can tell us a lot about the journey that we are on. So studying different myths can be very helpful, and we may resonate with aspects of the stories that we hear in mythology. Remember, myths have many different layers to them. On the surface layer, there's the action of what happens in the myth, but typically there is something below the surface that teaches us a lesson or teaches us something that we can understand about our own condition. And so working with deities and exploring their myths can help us understand things about our own journey toward wholeness, right? And enlightenment and everything like that. Now, other ways that deities can help us is that they can aid us during ritual. They can aid us during spell work. So if you're somebody who likes to do ritual and spell work related to your shadow work, calling in these deities can be very powerful, and choosing ones that are aligned with that part of shadow work that you're working on in that moment can be extra powerful, right? And compound the energy that you're working with. These deities can offer us guidance and insight. So if you go into meditative states or you do divination and you speak to them that way, they can give you insight into the journey that maybe you're not clearly being able to see in this moment. And so there's a lot of different reasons why we might use deities. Now, it's important to say here that you definitely don't have to have deities in your shadow work. You don't have to have deities in your witchcraft. But for those who are drawn to myth and to deities, this can be a really powerful way to increase the depth of your shadow work. So what is shadow work? So for those who don't know, very briefly, shadow work is looking internally, trying to seek the sources of the unconscious forces that are operating inside of us. So when you are speaking, or you have actions, and any of those times when you say, I don't really know where that came from, or I don't know why I always react this way in certain situations, this is always a kind of points backwards to unconscious motivations and forces inside of you that are controlling your behavior, your actions, your speech. As we begin to understand what those motivations are and those forces are, where they come from, many of them come from childhood, but they can also come from relationships and experiences that we've had as we've been on our journey. But as we begin to uncover those connections, we then decide to react or not react, right? So up until that point, we're just sort of reacting without having any idea why we're reacting. But when we uncover what's in the shadows, we now understand what's behind, and we get to choose whether to react or not, and we take back our power. So much can be uncovered in the shadow. It's not just the kind of the darkness within us. It's not just the negative things. It also holds great creative power as well. So there's a lot of reasons to be exploring the shadow. And Carl Jung, the godfather of shadow work, he said that shadow work itself is the most authentic form or authentic pathway to enlightenment. I don't think it's the most authentic pathway. I think there are other pathways that are authentic as well, but it is a very accessible pathway for people. So that's why so many people are doing shadow work these days. So if you are newer to that path, we're actually going to talk a little bit in the Q&A later on. Somebody's asking a question about how to get started, so I'll be talking a little bit more about that. But without further ado, let us jump in and let's talk about these deities. Okay, so we are going to start with Lilith. So Lilith is often known as the rebel. So like I'm going to kind of give names to some of these deities to help you understand when you would work with them, how you would choose it now is the right time to work with them. Now, first of all, you can just simply be drawn to a deity just because there's something in you that says, you're supposed to work with that deity. So for years, I've been drawn to Kuan Yin. There's just something in my aura that kind of says that she's someone I should work with. Recently, over time, I had been drawn to Yemaya, but there's something kind of in my aura now that she's more present around me now. So sometimes that just happens with a deity, with a goddess or a god. They're just sort of present around you. You hear their name being mentioned a lot, and you get these inclinations that it's somebody that you're supposed to work with. But you can also listen to these stories that I'm going to tell, and some of the information I'm going to tell you about each of these deities, and you may get drawn to them because of something in their story, or because of something in the intentions that they're most aligned to, that also happens to align to the part of your shadow work path that you're on right now. So who is Lilith? Well, it depends on who you ask. So some people will say that she is a deity from Jewish mythology and folklore, but actually Lilith probably goes back much further than that, back into Mesopotamian myth, and possibly further back even than that. So she is a figure who was later then integrated into Jewish mythology. Now, she is said to be the first wife of the biblical Adam, or I guess I should not even say the biblical Adam, but the Adam of the Old Testament, I guess I should say. They say that Lilith is the first woman. So she was a wife to Adam, but unlike Eve, who comes later, and Eve was made out of one of Adam's ribs, Lilith was made equal to Adam. So woman made equal to man. Now, during her life with Adam, Adam began to become more dominant over her, and asked her to submit to him. In some stories, it says he asked her to. He wanted to be on top of her during sex, and she did not want to be dominated that way, and so she resisted, and she reacted, and she acted out. Now, because of this, at some point, she leaves the Garden of Eden. She goes off on her own. And some stories say that she was then followed and terrorized by these angels. who, made life very impossible for her. Some stories even say that they killed her children. They say she was having demon babies and they killed these babies. But, if we really look down at the very deepest part of this myth, this is a woman who said no, and she wasn't listened to, and then she leaves and people chase her and they terrorize her and they assault her. And so this is really part of the story that many people will connect to and react to when they're doing shadow work. So she can be a great goddess to work with when you're trying to work through your own autonomy. So coming into your own power, maybe you have inclinations inside of you where you're feeling rebellious. She's a great goddess to work with when you're feeling that way. She's a great goddess for sexual empowerment, and it doesn't matter what gender you identify with, anybody can work with her. But in particular, she's a goddess of feminine rage. And remember, feminine and masculine energies are in all of us, regardless of our gender that we're identifying with, they're in all of us. So if you have that feminine rage inside of you, she can be a great goddess to work with. Someone who's trying to work, like I said earlier, towards self-sovereignty and having power over, and mastery and power over themselves. Somebody who feels like they've been exiled. This would also be a person who might really respond to working with Lilith. So I've already told you a lot of her story. Lilith's story is at least of the Bane story we know of her, and how she was exiled from the Garden of Eden. Her story is about the price of saying no to being small. So if you resonate with that, she may also be a good goddess to work with. She can help us confront the shame that might be internalized inside of us around our voice. So people who are working with the throat chakra, they're working with speaking up, finding their voice. She can be a good one for them. She's good for people who are trying to establish boundaries and make sure that their boundaries are heard, and are not resisted, right? She also is a good goddess for working with our sexuality and our self-worth. So a question to think about with Lilith is, what parts of you have been exiled for refusing to conform? So whether that is conformity in any part of your life, what parts of you have been like exiled, have been shunned, have been shut down for refusing to conform? So some of the shadow themes that you can work through with Lilith are shame. I've mentioned a lot of these already. Repression, sexuality, self-sovereignty. The symbols of Lilith. So let's suppose you decide to work with Lilith and you don't know a lot about her. First of all, what I will say for all of these deities is, because this is a short episode, it's just an hour, and we got four goddesses to talk about, we're not able to go into great depth here. So if she piques your interest and you want to know more about Lilith, I definitely recommend doing some research on her, reach out to people who work with her. But at least here's something that gets you started. So symbols that connect to Lilith, you can incorporate some of these into your altar space, or just into your space if you want to work with her. Owls, some people call her like the screech owl. Serpents, you can see that connection to the Garden of Eden. Wind, the dark moon, mirrors are also symbols of Lilith. Some offerings that you can give her are red wine, dark fruits of any kind. I always like to talk about offerings are not necessarily just physical things that we give. A lot of times we think of it just like food or flowers or things like that. But you can also offer things like spoken declarations of your power, or written declarations of your power. So if you sit down and you write down all the ways that you are powerful, that's considered an offering to Lilith. Sensual movement. So if you, intuitive movement, working with the sacral chakra because of her connection to sexuality and sensuality. Any art that's born out of rage or out of anger, any of this can be dedicated to Lilith as well. So you can use her in shadow work when you are trying to reclaim your power, if you're trying to find autonomy after being controlled, if you have a lot of rage and some really angry emotions, she can be a good one to help you funnel those and work through them. If you're somebody who's been said that you are too much, a lot of people have heard that before. I know from talking to people in the groups that I run, people are always being told, especially when they were kids and growing up, you're just too much. So if you've been told that you're too much, Lilith is also a great one to work with. In our Shadow Seekers membership, we have worked with Lilith 2 times, and I wanted to talk about how we worked with her. Um, so in one ritual, this is going back a while ago, we did a ritual called Releasing Childhood Expectations. So when you kind of think about Lilith's story, there was this expectation that she was going to lie under Adam and that she was going to take anything that he asked. She was just kind of subservient to him. So there's these expectations in her story of like what a woman is supposed to be or what a wife is supposed to be, right? But everybody has had these expectations that were sort of placed on us from being from early on in childhood. Like, what did your parents expect you to be? What did you expect you to be? What did you expect? What teachers expect from you? And so sometimes these expectations, they restrict us and they restrict our energy and they put us in this little box where we don't fit. And so working through sort of what were the expectations that people had of you versus like, where are you right now? Did you resonate with these expectations or not? Kind of breaking free of the chains of those expectations can be a really powerful work when working with Lilith. And that's what we did in that ritual. And then more recently, near the end of last year, we did a ritual called Exploring Our Darkest Desires. And this is where we talked about, like, you know, those things that that you all think about but you would never express because you're afraid that they are outside of like societal norms or they're not like what good people think about. You know, we always think about things, right, that we don't necessarily act out on, but you know, sometimes people are like, I just want to quit my job and say, screw it all, right? You know, those are these dark desires that we have, or leave um, my marriage, or right. Or I always think about the story. If anyone has read the story, The Awakening with Kate Chopin, which was written around 18 very late 1800s, 1897 or 98, I think, about this woman who just did what every woman was supposed to do at that time, and she got married and she had kids, and she starts to have these feelings that she doesn't want any of that. That doesn't make us bad people to have these feelings. And so working with Lilith through some of those dark desires can help us not feel the shame we have just from having these kinds of thoughts. Okay, so she's a great goddess to work with. You know, I know she's very popular. You know, Cindy is saying, she said Lilith was independent, she broke free. Yeah, so she's a great goddess for people who want to find independence, feel like they want to break out. Personally, I think she's a great goddess for like the time right now, where we do have people who feel that their rights are being impinged upon. And so anytime where you kind of feel like you want to rebel and break out and kind of resist, she can be a good goddess to work with. Sonia's saying I need her. Yeah. So Sonia is in Shadow Seeker, so you can go ahead and check out if you haven't already watched that ritual on the deepest desires or darkest desires. You could try that one. We are going to be working with Lilith again in Shadow Seekers as well. But anybody can do research on her, learn more about her, and especially if she's somebody that you are connecting to. Um, Okay, so welcome to anybody else who is joining us. Great to have you all here. So if anybody works with Lilith, especially, we'd love to hear from you. And anybody who thinks that you'd want to work with her, let us know as well. Okay, so we are going to move next on to the goddess Nyx. So Nyx is a Greek goddess, and she is the primordial goddess of the night. Now, Nyx is a primordial goddess. Now, some actually say that Lilith, like, go if you trace her all the way back to Mesopotamia and potentially to beyond that, um, many people say that Lilith, or some people say that Lilith is also a primordial goddess. So, primordial goddesses are goddesses that were there long before other goddesses or gods, and they tend to have this. I don't know the best way to describe it. Sometimes it can be a little harder to relate to them because they are not personified as much. And so Nyx is definitely one of those deities. She is born from chaos or the void. Her mythology, her origin story says she is older than the Olympians, and the mythology says that even Zeus, the king of all the gods, feared her because she's so hard to understand, really. Now, she is the goddess of night and of darkness, of dreams and the subconscious. So she's perfect for shadow work because that's where all of this takes place, in the unconscious. She is a goddess of fate and of the unknown and the deep mystery of creation, because she's kind of like out of nowhere she comes, right? There isn't this origin story like you think about, like Aphrodite. We have this clear story of where she comes from, out of the churning of the ocean sea. And we don't have this clear story. Nyx is just comes out of the void. Now, she represents, for that reason, she represents the unknowable aspects of ourselves, the stuff that you really don't get, the dreams that you have no idea what they mean and can't understand, the instincts that you have, and the instincts that you ignore. So, especially if you are somebody who's trying to work with your instincts and your intuition, your gut reactions, and really trust them, she could be a good one to work with. She also is a goddess, can help us with the darkness that we fear. So those things that your deepest fears, she can be a great goddess to work with. She reminds us that not everything needs to be illuminated in order to be sacred. I think she also teaches us that sometimes things just stay in the mysteries, in the darkness, and that we don't always we I suppose what I should say is we probably should release our expectations to understand everything in this lifetime. So most of us are not here on our final lifetime. We're somewhere in the middle of a long journey of different lifetimes, and you're here for something, maybe for several things, but you're not here for everything. And so I think that what's important about her is she teaches us that there are some things that will stay in the darkness until we're ready to understand them, and to be okay with that. Nyx is always, it's said that she's always around us at all times, but she appears very often. Now, I should say she appears very infrequently, is what I meant to say. So, meaning that very few of us actually see her, but she's surrounding us at all times. Um, so she asks us an important question in our shadow work. What are you afraid to feel because you don't fully understand it? So sometimes there are things that we will just force out into the shadows, or we're like, well, I'll deal with that at some other time, or I'm not going to feel that, or I don't want to face that. She's asking us, what is it? At least what is it? Doesn't mean that you have to go after it right now and pursue it right now, but to at least identify it. What is it that I'm afraid of facing, because I'm afraid of fully understanding it? She is darkness that teaches us that darkness is not evil. Most of the people who follow me know that by now, but sometimes people are still afraid of some of these goddesses. They're like, well, aren't these like demons? Aren't these evil goddesses? And really, from our perspective, there's not evil or good here. It's just these are different shades of the divine feminine, just like the gods are the different shades of the divine masculine. And all of this, what it reminds us too, is all of this is within us, because it also reminds us of the human condition. Nyx is vast, like the night, like the universe. She's unknowable. She can help us to surrender to the mysteries within us, especially those that we're afraid to face. And she teaches us to trust what we can't be seen, what can't be seen. So again, if you are I think she's a good goddess for like self-belief, because if you're having trouble, like, oh, I don't want to trust this, or I don't want to believe in this until I see this, or I have a bunch of evidence. And if you feel that's really getting in the way of your intuition, or moving forward with your magical or your spiritual path, she could be a good one, because she just teaches you got to let go. You got to trust, even if you can't see it, if you can feel it, you've got to trust this. So if you decide that you want to work with her, some of the symbols of Nyx are stars, because she was created out of darkness and night, black veils, the cosmic night, and noise is also a symbol of hers. Or sorry, mist. Mist is a symbol of hers. And so if you wanted to leave her offerings, there are many different offerings you can leave. Like many of the dark goddesses, always dark wines, dark fruit, dark foods, dark chocolate, things like that are always good physical offerings. But you can also offer her silence. So if you're somebody who's never, like, let's say you've never taken a vow of silence or spent time in like intentional silence, that could be a great offering to her. Taking walks at night is a great offering to Nyx. Stargazing, dream journaling, just journaling about unconscious things that kind of pop up out of your consciousness or out of your unconsciousness can also be a good offering to her. Doesn't have to be physical things. So we work with her in our shadow work when we want to do some dream work. She'd be a good one to help us with that. We are doing a deep descent into the void, like we're really trying to get into the darkness and the unknowable things. A deep descent into ancestral memory. So this isn't just the ancestors of like a few generations ago. This is the ancestors of way, way, way back in your past. So if you're trying to get into that kind of ancestry and ancestral work, Nyx could be a great one to support you. People who are exploring their psychic gifts, again, especially if what you're dealing with your psychic abilities is that inability to trust and let go. She can be a good one. And then just any time that we're working through the unknown, she's a great goddess to work with. So has anybody worked with Nyx before? Sonia said I've been hearing her name, and when you do hear a deity's name like that, that is definitely make a note of that. It means she's in your aura for some reason. She's there, yeah. So Sam said she's the grandmother of night, unborn, undying, immortal. Yeah, and going back to that, like that primordial aspect of her, she's the darkness behind the stars and the darkness beneath consciousness. Yeah. So Sabrina is not on with us tonight, but I know that she, somewhere in the course of our Shadow Seekers membership, she started to get messages from Nyx and began working with her as well. So yeah, great goddess to work with. So especially if, like Sonia was saying, she's hearing her name places, she's definitely in your aura for a reason. Okay, so let us now next talk about another Greek goddess. So this is Persephone, who is the queen of the underworld. Now, she's a very popular goddess. A lot of people love working with her. I like her, and I want to talk about kind of some of the different forms and different ways that you can work with her depending on what it is that you're working with. So she is the daughter of Demeter, who is abducted by Hades. She eventually becomes a queen of the underworld in her own right, and that's an important aspect of her story. Sometimes we focus a lot on the rape and the abduction and the victimhood that she experiences, but she also steps into her role as queen of the underworld, and so she can be a really great goddess for people who are trying to regain power after being abused or something like that. So, hold on, I gotta just close something there. Okay. So, she is also a great goddess, or a goddess of the underworld and of seasonal cycles. So if you're trying to kind of work with seasonal cycles around you, she can be a good goddess to do with that. Transition, duality, and rebirth. So she transitions from her maiden form into, kind of her underworld form at some point. There's this duality in that she's both. And I'm going to tell part of her story in just a moment for those who don't know it, because she can exist as two different sides at one time. She's a goddess of the sacred descent into the underworld, into your shadow. If you followed me for a while, you know the underworld is very much connected to your unconscious. So on one level, it's where beings go when they cross out of this plane. But on another level, what we're talking about in myths, when we're talking about the underworld, is your own unconscious. And she's also a deity of innocence reclaimed. So let's just tell the story, one version of the story of her abduction. So she was abducted by Hades. So one story tells that in her form, Kore, Kore, is her maiden form. She was one day picking flowers. In many myths, it said it was the narcissus flower, and she was picking it. And so when she when she was doing all of this, she's very beautiful and very young, and Hades saw her up above from the underworld. He saw her up above picking these flowers. He decided he wanted her, so he creates this great chasm. The earth opens up. He comes, he grabs her, he takes her down into the underworld, and while she is there, she eats pomegranate seeds. And when you're in the underworld, this also goes for the fairy world. If you eat there, strange things happen, and in some stories it says you have to stay there. So the rules are that she had eaten in the underworld, and therefore she has to stay there. So meanwhile, Demeter is up above, searching for her abducted daughter, cannot find her, eventually kind of gets wind of what happened to her. In some stories, Hecate told her what happened to Persephone. You know, Demeter goes to Zeus. She says, I want my daughter back. And Zeus is like, well, she ate in the underworld, and that's the rule. She has to stay there. So Demeter is like, okay, well, then I'm going to just withdraw all of my fertile energy from the earth, and you guys can just deal with it, right? And so she does that. And then after a while, Zeus is like, well, we can't have the fertility of the earth being taken away, so we're going to have to make a compromise. So the compromise is that Persephone can return to Demeter, her mother, for half of the year, and then she will have to be in the underworld for the other half of the year. And this is the compromise that is agreed upon. And so this also, at another level, helps to explain the changes of the seasons. So it's said that Persephone returns to the earth, above earth, at spring equinox. And then she descends, she begins her descent into the underworld around Mabon, or fall equinox. And then by Samhain, she's in the underworld, and she reclaims her role as queen of the underworld. So what I love about her as a goddess to work with is all of the different levels. So at one level, we can work with Kore, the goddess before her abduction, the goddess that is full of innocence. So if you want to really tap into like your inner child before all of the other things happened to you that hardened you and changed you, Kore can be a very great goddess to work with. At the level of Persephone, who's being abducted, you can work with her at that level if you are somebody who was a victim of abduction or of assault or of rape, or of trauma of any kind. You can work with her at that level, right? And kind of work through what it feels like to kind of work through your role as that role in your trauma. And then in third level, we can work with her as the queen of the underworld. So she becomes queen through her trauma. She is no longer here a captive. She is the queen in her own right. And she here teaches us that so much power can be found when we work through our own trauma. So it shows us that the descent does not mean destruction. None of this destroyed her, right? Instead, it means transformation. She had to become somebody new because of the descent. So we may not be able to change the things that happened to us, just like she couldn't change the abduction and the descent. But what she could have some control over is what she does about it. And that's what also we have control over. It doesn't mean that we have to be like a suit, we can't spend time in playing the victim role or being in the pain and the deepness of all of that. But at some point, her story teaches us that we can pull ourselves out of that and reclaim our power. She teaches us how to reclaim our power even after our trauma, and how to live in both the light and the dark halves of the cycles, because she knows that very, very well. Now, here's a good question for you in your shadow work, especially if you're called to work with Persephone. What part of you emerged stronger from what once felt like loss or captivity? So if you kind of think about the losses you felt, maybe times that you felt that you were held captive to a certain place or person, or experience, but during which of those situations do you emerge stronger? So she offers us that to help us understand that and explore that in our shadow work. So if you feel called to work with Persephone, some of the symbols that you can use, that you can incorporate into your altar space, are pomegranates, pomegranate seeds, torches that helped light her way to the underworld, flowers, especially the narcissus flower. I think it's Narcissus, I think is how you pronounce the flower. But that was particularly the flower that it's said in myths she was picking. And then the underworld itself is a symbol of Persephone. Offerings, seeds, pomegranate juice, poetry, especially poetry about your own descent and rebirth. So as ways that we can use Persephone in our shadow work is when healing from trauma that we might have experienced, when we are having kind of like identity shifts, throughout our kind of journey, our identity can change at times. And so we're having those shifts. She can be a good one to call in. Periods of liminality. So liminality is when, the veil's kind of thin and we feel like we're in one foot in one world and one foot in the other. This tends to be very prominent at transitions in between the seasons. But if you're ever feeling like there's a period of liminality in your own life where the veils are kind of thin, and you maybe are just on the verge of making breakthroughs, she could be a good one to call upon. She teaches us how to thrive in the darkness, not just survive. So in our own Shadow Seekers membership, we have worked with her a couple of times. In particular, most recently, we had a ritual called Descent of the Shadow Self. We did this right at Mabon. And during that ritual, we really focused on our own shadow aspects that were willing to come out or were able to come out to the surface. And you can explore a lot about your shadow self as you allow yourself to make that descent with her. So, very popular goddess, especially among dark goddesses. Has anybody worked with her before? Okay. Chelsea said she has 3 little statues that she uses to represent night, and she calls them Grandmother Night. And she said she'll put, yeah, I don't know why it won't let you post pictures in this thread right here, but post them. We'd love to see them. Post them somewhere else. Peggy said, what if there is something that draws you to each of them? Is that being greedy or indecisive, or really not knowing who in particular to work with? There's something beautiful about all of them, but it's hard to know where to start. She said, I tried to work with Hecate, but not sure I'm even doing that really right. Is there a goddess who's just good to start with? I'm just all over the place. So and then Peggy said Persephone is she good for addiction or alcoholism like rebirth, aka recovery? Yeah, I think Persephone would be great for working through addictions and alcoholism. Okay, so to answer a couple of these questions while we're in them, so it is not greedy or indecisive to feel like called to work with several goddesses. Some people feel comfortable only working with one patron. Other people feel comfortable working with multiple ones. So I absolutely think that you can work with as many as you want. That's my opinion, but you're going to hear different opinions from other people. But I come from an eclectic. Our tradition is an eclectic tradition. We work with deities of all pantheons. And I was even talking to a woman at a shop the other day because I was I've been working with Lakshmi for a very long time, but Yamaya has been in my aura for a while. And I had said to the woman, like, I feel like kind of bad. Like, I feel kind of guilty if I begin to work with Yamaya when Lakshmi has been my patron for so long. And the thing that the woman said at the store I thought was really interesting and resonated with me. And so I'm glad you asked this question because I think it's going to resonate with others as well. And, what she said is these deities, it's not like you're the only worshiper of this deity or person honoring this deity, right? There's people all over the world, and these deities do not need us to, worship them for them to exist, despite what Neil Gaiman's book American Gods says. I mean, there's some truth, there's some reality to it, but for the most part, these gods and goddesses they do not need people, and so they don't feel hurt if you are working with more than one deity. So as long as it feels okay to you, there's nothing in it that will offend them. At least that's my opinion, and that was the opinion of this woman who owns this witchcraft shop. I do think that it's probably best to narrow it down and focus on 1 or 2 deities at a time. It's like anything in witchcraft. It's not really going to work if you try to work with everything all at once. But it doesn't mean you can't work with them in the future. So kind of like me, Kuan Yin has been in my aura for a long time, but yet I've yet to really do any real work with her. I know that I will at some point. It's just not that time yet. So you can absolutely be called to all of them. Maybe Persephone is very accessible. I would just kind of think about which is the one that calls to you the most right now. Start with her, and then see where it goes. And then Sam was saying all deities are the many faces of divinity, of one divinity. And so I agree with that. That is definitely our belief system in our own tradition. Some belief systems don't believe that. They think that they don't think that all deities are one, are many faces of one divinity. But I very much believe that. And many of the teachers and the authors that I have studied from also believe that as well. So again, yeah, it's like Yemaya is one, Yemaya and Lakshmi are two different deities, but like Sam said, still they're two different faces of the divine, of the one divinity. Yeah. Um, okay. Oh, and then Chelsea was speaking of Yamaya. She was saying, oh my gosh, she said she bought Heather, a former coven member, a beautiful painting of Yamaya. She worked with her for a long time. They did a full moon ritual with her at the beach for fertility, and it worked. But she sent a giant wave. She wanted more of an offering, I guess. Yeah. So sometimes, it's kind of interesting too. Yamaya actually demands large offerings, I think. That's what I've heard from others as well. Okay, so let me shift over into our final deity of tonight, the Morrigan, and then I'll tell you who's on the list for next time. So you'll have that to look forward to. So the Morrigan is a Celtic goddess. She is often called the Phantom Queen. And in fact, what we really should, when we talk about the Morrigan, what we really should mention is that she's not just one goddess, she's a group of goddesses. So, despite the fact that I am pretty much all Irish and English, I cannot pronounce a lot of these words. Okay, so I'm going to do my best. So if anybody knows better, just give me grace because I may be mispronouncing these, but hopefully I'll get it right. Okay, so the groups of goddesses, depending on the source that you're getting this information from, one goddess that makes up the Morrigan is Bav, spelled Badb, and this translates to crow of battle. So she is the aspect of the Morrigan who is connected to war, to death, and to battle. And so it's said she will show up on a battlefield before the battle begins. A crow will show up, and that is Bav here, kind of foreshadowing the battle that will take place on this site at some point. The another aspect of the Morrigan is Macha. She's the goddess of sovereignty of the land, so she's very connected to the sovereign land and to fertility and childbirth as well. And then a third aspect, sometimes some sources will just say Morrigan as the third source. Some will say Anna, and some will say Nemain. But the other sources will say that is more of a more modern addition to the goddess. But this third aspect of the Morrigan is associated with panic, with frenzy of chaos, the panic, frenzy, and chaos of the battle, the unpredictability of nature and of war. Now, what's interesting about the Morrigan is sometimes you'll hear people say that the Morrigan is a triple goddess, and that's not really true in the way that we, at least from the perspective of modern paganism and how we interpret triple goddess, Morrigan does not really fit into that category. So triple goddess from a modern pagan perspective is the maiden, mother, and crone. So we have these three aspects of the goddess, and she can move through these three aspects just like these three periods of life of a female. But the Morrigan is not like that. The Morrigan is probably better to think of it as three sisters or three aspects of one, but they don't fit neatly into maiden, mother, and crone. So while some people will call the Morrigan a triple goddess, it's just important to remember it's not exactly the same way that we would interpret it in modern paganism. Really, it's like three sisters who also exist all at once. So they are three separate goddesses, but one at the same time. So there's a little bit of not really a conflict there, but we have to be okay with it, like not those who are one and three all at the same time, right? Now let's just talk about a little bit about myth. So the myth tells us that she will appear as a crow before battle, like I mentioned earlier. She governs our fate, she governs our sovereignty, and she governs our death. She's the goddess of death and transformation, the goddess of sacred rage and power. So in one myth, there is a hero whose name is Cu Chulainn. He is a great hero in Celtic mythology, and the Morrigan offered him her protection and her support. Now, the myth tells us that he did not know who she was. In some myths, he didn't know who she was, or he didn't understand her power. And so he basically turns her down. He doesn't want her protection or her support. And so from that moment on, she becomes his adversary. And throughout all these myths, it'll talk about her showing up as different animals, in different animal forms, to challenge him and to weaken him. And eventually, when he dies, she sits on his shoulder as a crow, silent but always there. And so if you kind of dissect this myth, you can notice that it teaches us that when we ignore the goddess, when we ignore our guides, when we ignore the universe, the lessons that are around us, what will happen, or the invitations that the universe gives us to transform, when we ignore all those, they will cause us challenge. They will continue to challenge us. It doesn't just go away. It continues to challenge us and eventually can cause our destruction. So at one level, it teaches us that, when you are being called by the universe, listen, don't ignore it, right? Understand the great sacred power that is being offered you. So a good question to ask yourself, especially if you feel called to work with the Morrigan, is what are you being called to face before it forces you to change? So sometimes that stuff will come up in the periphery earlier, right? Before we get to that point where it's going to force us. If you're not listening to me, I'm just going to force this to happen. That's kind of what the universe is saying. So kind of think about that. Where in your life do you feel called to change? And how could you start moving towards that before you're forced to change? So if you decide to work with the Morrigan, symbols of the Morrigan are crows and ravens, blood, the battlefield, black water, and swords. And then offerings that you can offer to her: black feathers, storm water, because she is a goddess of impending storms. Any acts of courage, because she's a goddess who calls up courage within us. So just being courageous. Maybe you're somebody who doesn't feel courageous at all, but you step out of your comfort zone and you are courageous in a moment. That's a great offering to her. And also, like, divination tools can also be an offering, kind of working through divination with her. So use her in your shadow work when you're trying to face a fear that's pretty persistent, when you need to let go of something that is dead or has served its purpose, but maybe you're having trouble letting go. She can be a good goddess to work with when you're trying to reclaim your personal power, after you've been betrayed, or maybe you've been abused and you're just trying to reclaim your power. She can be a good one there as well. I think also, I didn't mention it, but if you're facing fear of death, or death of others around you, or death in general, she can be a good one to work with. Now, in our Shadow Seekers membership, we worked with her, at this point, it's almost 2 years ago, we worked with her in a ritual called Asking the Difficult Questions. This was a ritual that is very near and dear to my heart. It was my first time of ever working with the Morrigan. Following this ritual, so basically the ritual forces us to ask the questions that we don't want to ask because we're afraid of the answers. And I ended up quitting my job of 9 years the very next day after we did this ritual. And it wasn't easy, I will say. It was a tower moment. That's kind of what working with the Morrigan is about. It's not easy. But now I work half as much for myself, and I make more money. And so it was a great thing that I did. It was a great step in my path, but it wasn't easy. But working with the Morrigan and having her on that journey with me is what made it possible to do. So I also wanted to mention a story also about her. How we ended up working with the Morrigan in the first place is a few months before that ritual, I was walking across, I had hiked up a mountain and I was on the top of the mountain. I was walking across it and there was this crow, 2 crows, and they were following me and they were screaming at me, and they wouldn't stop screaming at me. And they followed me for a mile. And I was like, oh my God, what is going on? And I was starting to feel like a little like dread, like, oh my, is this a bad omen or something? You know, what are they trying to tell me? Because I can't figure it out. And about a mile of all of this going on, I kind of was like, maybe they're telling me about a deity to work with, that we should work with in Shadow Seekers. Because sometimes I go up to the mountain and I contemplate what we should do next in the membership. And I remember I was like, well, is it Odin? You know, we'd worked with Odin before, but I was like, is it Odin? And, you know, they're still crying, screaming at me. And then I said, is it the Morrigan? And they called one more time really loud, and they both flew off. And I was like, okay, the Morrigan it is. And then from then, I built this ritual around this experience. So anyway, that is my story of the Morrigan. She's a great goddess to work with, though, if you've never tried it. And a few more goddesses for the future as we close up and we segue into the Q&A. We may talk about Ereshkigal in the future. She is Inanna's sister. We did talk about Inanna in the first Dark Goddesses for Shadow Work episode, but we may explore Ereshkigal, who many say is actually our very shadow self. Tiamat, who is a Babylonian primordial goddess of chaos. Hel, a Norse goddess of the underworld. And then, of course, I mentioned Nephthys was supposed to be part of this episode tonight. She is an Egyptian goddess of mourning and death and grief. So she will be in the next episode for sure. Okay, so hope that helps. I hope it opens your eyes up to how to work with dark goddesses. I hope you learned a little bit about some maybe you didn't know already. And definitely share in the chat if you have worked with any of these or you're planning to work with any of these now after this episode. And just know we've got more coming. And you can always go back and check out episode, 138 is the deities, goddesses for shadow work, and then 140 is gods for shadow work. So you can always go check out those, and we have other ones that we feature in those episodes. Okay, so let us now segue into the Q&A because I have about 4 questions to answer here. If you're here live, put the questions in the chat, right? And I will answer those. And they don't have to be about dark goddesses or shadow work. It can be anything related to shadow work, energy work, and witchcraft. And Peggy was saying that's badass, the story about the Morrigan. Yeah, she chose you. I only feel bad that it took me about a mile to figure it out. She was probably like, what? Why can't you figure this out? But once I knew who it was, the crows cried one time and flew off, and I was like, okay, that's my confirmation. Sam said, blessed be Crow. Yes. Okay. And Anthony just joined us. You're joining us at the end. That's okay. You haven't missed the Q&A, but you want to go back and watch that later, probably the rest of it later, because we did talk about Lilith in the beginning, and I know how much you love her. Okay, so here we go. First question up is from Anthony. He said, I would love to learn more about sigils, how to read them, make them, etc. Okay, so I have this is a question I get asked a lot. And so sigils are symbols that we can make, that we can use in spell work, that we can use in magic. There's many different ways to make sigils. Sometimes sigils, some people will just make a sigil by, I'm sorry, I just got to close a couple of tabs, it's telling me. So sometimes people will just make a sigil as a symbol. So I was at a ritual with Starhawk on Friday night, and she gave out a sigil at the very end of the ritual. And it was like kind of like flames with like an inner flame in the middle of it. And so that was just a symbol that they had created, and then it's usually infused with some kind of an intention. In that case, the intention was protection. Other ways that people make sigils, this is the way that I usually make them, and it's the way I was taught, is you take you start from an intention with words. And so let's say I want to make a protection sigil. So I might come up with a saying like, I am protected and safe. Let's say that's my intention. And so then what you do is you cross out all of the repeating letters, any letter that repeats itself more than once, and any vowels, and you cross them all out, and then you're going to be left with a few letters, and then you form some kind of a symbol out of those letters. And so when you ask the question about like how do you read them, you usually don't read sigils because a sigil isn't really meant to be read. It's meant to be like there's some that theorize that where sigils actually come from is that witches or magical practitioners of old would create these. They would make them on these, put these symbols onto wax. They could throw them into the fire. That would get rid of all the evidence of their spell work. But if a person were to find a sigil later, they would have no idea what it meant because that was the whole purpose behind it. It has meaning, but the meaning is hidden. And instead you have this symbol. And only those who made it or were given the sigil and told what it meant would know what it meant. So you can't really sit and you wouldn't be able to read somebody's sigils unless you knew what they meant. But of course, you can make your own, like I said. And then because Anthony is in Shadow Seekers, if you haven't watched our summer solstice ritual from over the weekend, we made sigils. We made 2 sigils in that ritual, and I go into great detail of how to make them. So I would definitely recommend checking that out for Anthony or anybody else in Shadow Seekers who's interested in sigils and didn't do that ritual yet. Sigils can be destructible, meaning that they're usually destroyed and usually in fire. So you might make a sigil, you'd write it on a piece of paper, you'd put it in the flame, that would get rid of it, and then that's considered the activation of the magic, and then after that you're just supposed to forget about it. Just trust that the magic has been done. Other sigils are meant to be temporary or permanent. Temporary sigils are usually drawn on the body. For let's say you want protection in a certain space. You can make a sigil, you can draw it on your body, you can wash it off later when you no longer need that protection. Sometimes people will make permanent sigils that they draw somewhere in their home or on their property, put them behind picture frames, under bed mattresses, things like that. But different ways that a person can charge a sigil and use a sigil. So hopefully that helps. Sigil magic is one of my favorite types of magic. It's very easy. You can add it in with other forms, like you can have candle magic and sigil magic at the same time, and herbal magic. So yeah, so hopefully that helps. But check out for anybody in Shadow Seekers who wants to make sigils, check out that most recent most recent ritual, Summer Solstice. Okay, so next question comes from Melissa. And Melissa said, when you finally are at a peaceful place, when doing shadow work, do you sit still for a moment or do you just continue? She said, I come out of a drastic mess of a place in my journey, and I have this calm that just came over me. So can I just take a minute and practice stillness? And what I told her earlier is I said, yes, the short answer, yes, absolutely. You can always take a break. And in fact, you should know that. Like, it's not, shadow work is a journey, and this goes for everybody listening. Shadow work is a journey. It's a journey that isn't, it's not a one and done thing. We don't dabble in shadow work for a month or a couple months and then be like, okay, I've done my shadow work. No, shadow work is going to take the course of your lifetime to do, into your next lifetime to do. And so we can't be doing that 24/7, 365 days a year. So it's very common, and I tell this, like, this is for my members and shadow seekers, and for all of you who are not in it, who are also on a shadow work journey. It's right and it's good to take breaks. So in our shadow seekers membership, what we will do is we'll have some intense months where the workshops are very intense and we're making people get into their mother wound and their inner child stuff, and then we'll go and we'll do like astrology for a month where it's a little lighter, and or we did Ayurveda one month where we just kind of learned about different strategies in Ayurveda, or we did some breath work. We just do stuff that is a little lighter so that we're not just always immersed in this deep and heavy shadow work. So the answer is yes, absolutely. You can take some time, you can breathe, you can take some stillness. Just know that you did great work. You got to a place where that work kind of ends and you end through it, and now you take a breather. And maybe you study something else. Maybe you do some energy work. You work with some chakras, or you just just do some light witchcraft, do some spells or things like that, or do nothing at all. And then you come back when you're invited to come back, when the shadow work kind of seems like it's coming back for you, or back around to start to work with something else, and you're back on the path. So hopefully that helps. And we can always be moving forward in our spiritual journey, but we don't always have to be doing the deep and the dark stuff 24/7. Okay, next question is from Jennifer. So Jennifer said, I'd like to hear more about sun magic as opposed to moon magic, some more ways to work with the sun, etc. And she said, and if charging crystals and the moon doesn't resonate with me, and I also know that a lot of crystals can't go out in the sun. She said, are there other ways that I can recharge my crystals, like other than moon charging, essentially? Okay, so two things about this. For number one, the question is, I think I've never done an episode on sun magic before, and I think we're at the perfect time in the Wheel of the Year to do it. So next episode, next week, 7/1, I'm going to do an episode on sun magic. So I'm not going to answer the first part of the question about what are ways to do sun magic. We're going to have a whole episode about it next week. But I do want to answer the second part of the question, which is about other ways to charge your crystals. So if you don't really resonate with charging under the moon, that's okay. What we're really doing when we're charging crystals is we're really, or recharging crystals, is we're essentially trying to get rid of any negative energy that they may have picked up in the course of that past month, or however long it is since we charged them the previous time. We're trying to clear them. We're trying to open them up so that they, can fully do their job and they're not bogged down by extra energy that may be clinging to them. But there's a lot of different ways we can do it. We don't have to just put them out in the moonlight or in the sunlight. So you can charge your crystals or clear or cleanse your crystals through sound. You can get sound bowls, and you can hold your crystal and just kind of bring them in and out of the vibrations of that sound. You could charge them through singing and chanting. So I think like seed sounds, like if you are somebody who knows the seed sounds of the chakras, that could be a great way, and just kind of intone all of the seed sounds as you kind of let that wash over your crystals. So that would be a way to do sound cleansing. You can do salt cleansing as long as the crystals are safe to be in salt. And most of them, I've often done like where I'll put like a bowl of salt and then I'll just place the crystal like on top of that bowl of salt. So unless it's a crystal that says you can't do that, and maybe people know more about it, ones that you can't do that than I do, but I think most would be safe to just simply place in a bowl of salt. So that's one way that you could cleanse, or you could just sprinkle salt on the crystals as well to cleanse them. Another thing is cleansing through selenite. So this is something a friend of mine always does, and she taught me, is to get like a selenite plate like this, or a selenite bowl, and you can just place your crystals on that or in the bowl and leave it overnight, and that will cleanse and clear them. And so my friend actually taught me that if you have crystals that you always wear and you feel that they pick up like negative energy when you're out and around, like maybe my some of my crystals that I'm always wearing all the time, right? This labradorite. You could place this on this plate when you go to bed, and then it will just cleanse and clear it, and then you can put it back on in the morning. So I like cleansing through selenite. You can also cleanse through earth. Using earth, you can bury it in the ground, and that can cleanse and clear the energy of the crystal. And you can also do smoke cleansing. So you can get a sage bundle or another type of herbal bundle or incense, and you can just move the crystal in and out and around the smoke of that incense, and that will also clear the energy. So hopefully that helps, and your question inspired an episode, so we will be doing the sun magic episode next week. And then I have one final question I'm just going to answer, and this is from Vanessa. She said, how do I get started without being overwhelmed? So I wasn't sure if Vanessa was referring to getting started with shadow work, witchcraft, or energy work. So I'm going to share one tip for each of them to how to get started if you're brand new to all of this. So if you're brand new to witchcraft, the thing I recommend most is not to get overwhelmed by all the stuff out there. Really think about what it is that draws you to the craft in the first place. Is it divination? Is it goddesses? Is it elements? Is it energy? Is it spell work? and start to hone in and study that one area of witchcraft, and that will start to open up other doors. As you study that one aspect, you will begin to open up other doors, and it will lead you to other places to study. But don't try not to be overwhelmed by everything. The other thing is, if you're really trying to study witchcraft in particular, it would probably serve you, if you're brand new, to get a Witchcraft 101 book of some kind. I really like Christopher Penzak's The Outer Temple of Witchcraft. You can also find courses where people will take you from, beginning to the end of kind of like training you. And in fact, we have a course I'll talk about in just a moment. But really trying to not do everything at once is my best advice for people who are first coming to the path of witchcraft. If you're first coming to the path of shadow work, I recommend finding shadow work prompts and seeing if you could do a few. You don't have to write them down if you don't like journaling, but you can Google shadow work prompts and find a few questions. One of the easiest questions to use is, what irks or irritates or annoys you out there in the world? And then start to investigate like what that is and where it comes from. You can also try to do this near the end of a lunar cycle. That's the time that's most aligned to shadow work. So if you're brand new, it can kind of help you get into it when you're coming to the end of a lunar cycle, which we are. Today is the dark moon. So happy dark moon, everybody. It's like the time most aligned for shadow work for a lot of people. And then if you're trying to get started with energy work, I think the chakra system is one of the most accessible systems there is when it comes to energy. I would start with the root chakra, explore the root chakra, and then from there start moving up through the rest of the chakras and learn about each of those in turn. And we have a lot of episodes on chakras, so you can go to our Body Mind Witchcraft YouTube channel and you can learn a lot there. So hopefully that helps anybody who's brand new on the journey. And let me just go into the chat. Let's see if there's any other questions. Anthony said, "Can you cleanse with a bell?" Yeah, sure. Any sound like a bell, the sound bowl, anything like the chanting, humming, things like that. But you could absolutely use a bell to cleanse. And then Taliesin has said that some of the crystals, like quartz or selenite, are self-cleansing, which is why people will use the selenite plate. You don't really have to cleanse selenite; it cleanses itself, and then you can use it to cleanse others. So that's a good point to bring up. And then he's got some good tips in the chat here. I'll read these because the people who are back on YouTube won't see these chats or these comments from the live. Taliesin said crystals with a Mo score of 6.0 or more can be used in water. So he says that most ITD, those that end in ITD, are usually not recommended for water. But if you ever, when in doubt, just look it up. But it's good to know if there's 6.0 or more on the Mo scale, they can be used in water. So they could be water cleansed. Okay. Can sand be used to cleanse? Sure. Yeah, sand, like soil, can absolutely be used to cleanse. And then, of course, earth. Yeah. And Taliesin said ITE on the end of the stone is usually not. Now I lost the comment. Usually not water. Usually can't be put in water. Okay, so let me kind of close up here. Let's talk about next week. I've already kind of mentioned, so next week's episode is on sun magic. And then after that, we'll have an episode on 7/8. I think we'll have an episode on more gods for shadow work. So we'll take a little break from this, talk about sun magic next week, and then we'll be back with some more gods of shadow work. And then on 7/15, I haven't decided yet. I have a money magic workshop that is coming up. It's going to be a free workshop on Zoom, so it won't be on Facebook Live like this. It'll actually be on Zoom. People can come and interact with me there. I think it might be the week of 7/15. So as we get closer and I figure that all out, I will let you all know. But everyone's invited to that. I'll actually be teaching a money magic spell during that workshop as well, and we'll do it together. And then that is going to open up my course, Demystifying Witchcraft. For those who are not already enrolled in that course, you'll be able to enroll if you would like. And that course teaches you all of the kind of basics of witchcraft, from how to cast a circle, to call the quarters, to work with deities, doing spells, the magic of spell work, the science of spell work, elements, moon cycles, all kinds of stuff are all in that course. Up until now, that course has only been sold to those in my membership, my Shadow Seekers membership, but we're about to open it up to the public. And then one of the wonderful things about that course, too, is that completing that course is a prerequisite to initiating into my coven of Midnight's Flame. So you get an invitation to join. You don't have to join it if you take the course, but you do get an invitation to initiate afterwards if you would like. So more information will be coming very soon about the course and this free workshop that's going to happen right before it. And so watch for that as we get closer. So as always, leave a heart somewhere in the feed. That helps us get this out to more people. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, if you haven't already done so. That way you'll never miss any of the future episodes. And also watch some of our old videos. We have like 100, there's like over 100 and some plus videos on there. We've reached over 1,000 subscribers now, which is one step to getting monetized. And now we need 4,000 video view hours for the year. So help to contribute to us getting there. Watch some of our old episodes, check those out. And if you have not already signed up for the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work, I'm just going to drop a final link here in the chat. And this will put you on our mailing list, so you will never miss anything in the future, like that free workshop coming up and stuff like that. And then you'll also get a copy of the Witch's Guide to Shadow Work. All right, so as usual, it's wonderful spending Tuesday night with you. It's the dark moon. I hope that you have a fantastic dark moon, whatever you choose, however you choose to spend it. And until next time, blessed be.